How do you speak up about a topic that is seen as taboo? My former client, Hasina Juma, models this powerfully. In this episode, you're going to gain insights on the impact that marginalization has on those affected by it, and you'll hear an incredible story that portrays what it actually takes to speak up against a taboo topic while becoming a recognized expert and thought leader. Hasina is an advocate who is boldly raising awareness about bisexual people of color, a group that is invisible in the Canadian communities of color, especially in the South Asian and Muslim communities, as well as marginalized within the LGBTQ community and society. Through her digital platform, she uses her own lived experiences to provide resources, tools, and support for bisexual people of color and their families. Her followers find her work as honest, insightful, inspiring, and thought-provoking. Recently, her advocacy work has been featured in newspapers, magazines, and podcast series, and she's also now speaking to audiences of 500 and more. This is the final conversation in my very special 10-episode client feature, where I've been featuring incredible clients who inspire me. If you are interested in working with me, a great place to start would be my website. Head to rubyfremont.com and click Work With Me to learn more. Today's episode is sponsored by the Mayfair Hotel and Eve American Bistro in downtown Los Angeles, home of my annual 3-day event, Amplified Soul Live. The 2019 event takes place February 22nd to the 24th. For info and tickets, head to rubyfremont.com/ASL. Now it is time to conclude this incredible 10-episode client feature with Hasina Juma. Welcome to today's Thought Leader, where I'm challenging you to rise up, speak up, and create a movement. I'm your host, Ruby Fremont, and I'm here as a catalyst for you, the new generation of thought leaders. Join me every week as I dive into raw and real conversations that will help you amplify your presence, influence, and impact. Hey, thought leaders, I am back with the final episode in this 10-episode client feature where I've been featuring clients who inspire me. And I couldn't be more excited to introduce all of you to Hasina Juma. Hasina and I have been on a pretty long journey together, and I feel very privileged and honored to have witnessed your journey for the, 15 months that we've been together?
Yeah, something like that.
But it kind of feels like lifetimes.
Yes, definitely.
So why don't you, your mission is one that is so fucking important, especially right now with everything that's going on in society and people really wanting to be seen and really wanting to be heard and understood. But what I think is really interesting is sharing a little bit about how that came to be. Like, where were you 14, 15 months ago when we just connected?
So I shared my sexual orientation with my immediate family members and my extended family members in 2016. So when we started working together in January, I was a bit on a high on life. If you're someone who identifies as heterosexual, the freedom you feel on an everyday basis is something that's innate in you. Like, it's something people don't really notice. For someone who identifies as a bisexual or someone who identifies in the LGBT community, we feel that freedom for the first time when we share our sexual orientation with those that matter the most to us. So I felt that for the first time at the age of 34 years.
Yeah, and it was difficult for you for an array of reasons, right? Like, it wasn't just because you were coming out for the first time. You come from a culture. Tell us a bit about that, actually.
So I face marginalization on two fronts. I'm a Canadian-born individual who grew up in Alberta. I have family roots in Africa as well as India. And I grew up with the Muslim faith. And growing up for the first 20 years of my life in Canada as a second generation, I felt marginalization through being a person of color. So oftentimes growing up, I lived in a suburb, which was in the 80s and the 90s, was primarily Caucasian population, middle class. Diversity has only entered our suburb in probably the last 6 years.
Wow.
And a lot of growing up was facing the question of, where are you from? And it was often from Caucasian individuals who were Canadian born. And it wasn't asking from a place of curiosity. It was coming from a place of I am a Caucasian, therefore I am better than you. And because you are a person of color, you are less than me. And when I hear that intention, that nuance as a 6-year-old, as a 7-year-old, as a 17-year-old, it really hurt, because I knew immediately that the person that was asking was also Canadian born most of the time. So what's the difference between me and you? Why am I being judged for my skin color? And so it took me a long time to sort of figure out, what does it mean to be Canadian, and what does it mean to be South Asian, and what does it mean to be Muslim, and what does that look like on an everyday level? And that took me about the first 20 years of my life. And I went away for university across the country, and it was the first time where I could be myself. I didn't have to conform to the norms in my religious community, the norms in my ethnic community, the norms in my family that are said and unsaid. I could just be myself. And it was during that time where I was exploring who I was at the age of from 18 to 24 that I came face to face with the truth that I was a bisexual.
Yeah.
And it was scary. It was exciting in the sense of that label felt home to me.
Yeah, you finally found like your like what you identified with.
But it was scary as fuck as well, because I looked around and I said, most of the people who I hang around with are people from my religious community. Those are the people who I hang out with, and we're all in university for a simple reason: get the piece of paper and get a degree so you can have a better quality of life than your parents who immigrated here. The majority of the people in that sphere were straight. So when I looked around, I didn't see anyone who was Canadian, who was part of my religious community and part of the LGBT community and thriving. So I expanded my circle and I said, well, let me look at other South Asians on campus. Let me look at celebrities. There was no Facebook at that time. There was no Twitter. We were just, the internet had just started prior to, in the early 2000s. And I looked around and I didn't see people of color who were thriving and who were part of the LGBT community. So I immediately associated that with being wrong and being shameful. And I quickly realized that being a bisexual, we face different challenges than the other sexual identities that are under the LGBTQ umbrella. So we face judgment from within our community, and we face judgment from outside of community. And that recognition was there as soon as I came face to face with my truth. So navigating that space seemed really overwhelming. And at that time, I wasn't feeling my feelings. I didn't have a relationship with myself. I was my biggest bully. I was all about people pleasing and achieving and just being someone else just so I could be liked. So the thought of losing that, losing my religious community, losing my ethnic community, losing my family, losing my friends, losing my place in society, not being understood by people who identified as LGBTQ and didn't see me as a credible identity. For me, that was equivalent to climbing like Mount Everest 10 times. So I decided to hide my sexual orientation for 10 years. And it wasn't until 2016 where in 2015, I sort of went through this process of seeking out help to say, life is either going to take me or I can either make a different choice and choose life. And I took the proactive step to get counseling, something that's not the default pattern when you're raised in the South Asian community or in the Muslim community. It's very much perceived as you can't sort it out yourself, that you had to pay someone to get help.
Right. It's not seen as something that we do. We don't see counselors or coaches or seek, support in that. We're supposed to deal with it on our own because we're just supposed to know.
Yeah, and it was there. So there was a lot of shame and guilt around that. And at the time, I was living with my family, and I would go to work during the day, and I would come home, and I would do counseling with an individual who lived in a different city. We did it through Skype, and I did it from the comfort of my room.
Mm-hmm.
And as people know who have gone to counseling, you don't necessarily feel your feelings in the session, you feel it after the session.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this iterative process that happens. So it got me to the place where I was able to share the news with my family, my immediate family and my extended family. And because I had accepted the shame and guilt, because I accepted that deep and dark part of myself that I had repressed
Mm-hmm.
for 10 years, and also repressed my sexuality in general for 30 plus years. It's not seen as, I didn't grow up seeing sexuality as something that was empowering. I saw it as something you do it for procreation and that's about it. So I had to do the healing on two fronts. And because I did that, my coming out experience was positive. So when I came to see you, it was a sense of, I feel like I'm on a high on life and I can engage in this process of finding freedom. And I honestly felt I was going to automatically know where I would fit into my
Mm-hmm.
world. And I thought, well, coming out is the biggest thing I have to worry about. Everything else is going to be rainbows and unicorns. And
Mm-hmm.
it was far from that. And during our journey together, we spent a lot of time figuring out, where do I feel safe? Where do I feel seen? Where do I feel loved? Is it in my family? Is it with my extended family? Is it still with my religious community? Is it still with my ethnic community? And there's that process of like sifting and sorting and unpacking this shame and this guilt and that sense of duty of being part of these communities because they've always been there. And if you leave them, then what do you replace them with? And
right. And I think it's really important for listeners to really understand, like, when you came out to your family, when people come out, that it's like you're finally owning a piece of you, and there's a sense of freedom that comes with it. And for you, for everyone who comes out, there's the real fear of like, are people going to accept me?
Mm-hmm.
However, for you, there's the double impact of being in a religion that doesn't necessarily support the LGBTQ community, and being also in a religion that is very much society driven. So it's a religion where everyone everyone hangs out together, and it's more than just your family. It's everyone who goes to mosque. It's all one thing. So for you, there was a lot on the line, but you had the courage to do that, which now that I know you now and what you're doing now, for me, that felt like an activation for you, like really activating your throat chakra, really activating your truth, and really activating that evolution that has led you to where you are today. So why don't you share a bit of the work that you do today? Because it's so important. As I've been talking to more and more of my clients, the underlying message is always, for me, like, your mess is your message. Your story is your purpose. And it's one of the things that I absolutely love about this client series, is unveiling all of that for our listeners. So tell us about your vision, and tell us about what you're doing now.
So what I'm doing now is I'm advocating for bisexual people of color and their families. And if you look at the LGBTQ entity, the people of color narrative is pretty much non-existent. So I'm using my lived experience, my positive experience, to say I am a representation of someone who's of color, who's Canadian, and who has roots in Africa and South Asia, and I am thriving in life. And there's not many people in society who are doing that. And I also use my lived experience to create resources and support for bisexual people of color. So things like infographics, and I talk about what are some false beliefs that bisexual people of color face and what are the underlying truths. So things such as you can be a bisexual in your house, but you cannot share that news in your religious community or your ethnic community. I also provide blog posts and interview series where I talk about how do you find your sphere of belonging and your place in your world when you're not accepted in your religion and you're accepted in your country of residence and you're invisible in your ethnic community. How do you find yourself in that context? And a lot of people aren't talking about that. If you look at the resources that are out there for the LGBT community, there are very few that are out there for bisexuals, and even fewer that are talking about the people of color perspective. Our narrative is, our context is different because people of color generally place a greater emphasis on family and on community and on religion. And that sense of all of those communities, we operate as a group. If you are part of the group, you're okay. If you're not part of the group, you feel the shame and guilt. So I unpack that, and I also provide resources to family members, because family members and people of color communities, they are not familiar with this. It's not something that they've grown up with. So their awareness is also at a kindergarten level, and we can accept parents to accept their children, and we don't equip them with information.
Yeah, and that's like has been one of your biggest lessons, right? Through all of this was really learning how to evolve from the coming out, the point of when you came out to where you are today. There was a real evolution, not just within you, but within your parents, within your family, and to actually be able to grow together when they come from a culture where they've never, ever, ever faced this before. And the other thing I want to point out to our listeners is this is a sign of true thought leadership. You see, you take your story and you create a purpose out of it. But not only that, is you see an opportunity that has yet to have been filled. And Hasina saw that opportunity for bisexual people of color, and now pretty much owns that fucking space. And there's no one else doing that. So you are the leading expert in this space. And this is how you become a thought leader. And she creates the resources. And let me tell you, her infographics, when I first saw your infographics, like, I'm not going to lie. Like, I've tried to make infographics before and they always look super janky. Like really, really bad. Like old school, for those who remember, like Coral Draw, like kind of like that shit. But you look at Hasina's infographics and they are impeccable. And you even have an infographic on like the coming out process, which I think is super valuable. So she has a ton of resources on her website. And the videos that you do, the interview series where you're sharing thoughts and insights with other people, it's incredible. And you are now public speaking, which is incredible. And all of this has like unraveled in your life from the moment you decided to activate your voice in coming out.
And I feel a big factor in that was because my coming out process was positive. And if you look at, not everyone's process is very positive. So I was very fortunate that my family said, we love you no matter what, and we don't know, we're not familiar with this, but we're willing to learn. And I feel like that was part of this catalyst that helped me move me forward, because had the experience been negative, or had I been not seen and not loved, then I feel like the journey would have been a little bit different. So that coming out experience is so critical, because if your blood family, whoever that is, if they love you, your sense of belonging in the world is, you found it. It doesn't matter what people say outside of that. But if you're someone who's a bisexual who doesn't feel like they belong in their LGBTQ community, and then they don't feel like they belong in their family, that's where you find that they get into addictions, they get into drugs, they get into all sorts of things, or they take their life because they say, what is what is in this world that's worth living if I don't feel like I belong? So if you look at a lot of the mental health stats around the LGBT community, and when they divide them down, the two groups that will always take the top two because they don't feel like they belong are the people who identify as transgender and the people who identify as bisexuals. And people ask, well, how can we reduce that? Well, the easy answer is create spaces where we can feel seen and loved and supported within the LGBTQ community and in society. And it's such a simple thing, but it's something that's overlooked.
Yeah, because if people, what people don't understand is if you don't actually voice it or acknowledge it, people feel unseen and unheard. So it's not that, like, for example, it's not that your religion straight up says, like, we don't support LGBTQ. Is that correct? It's just that they don't even refer to it. They don't identify with it. They don't address it. And there's a couple things I want to really address here. One is, let's just be really fucking honest, Hasina. The other reason why you had a positive coming out experience is because you took ownership of it by seeking out communities of support. And I think that's something that many people do not do. You know, you had workshops that you would attend, and you had a community there. You sought out me as a coach, and you've consistently sought people out to support you. You had your counselor, like, you've created a support network to support you through that. So let's not discredit the work that you did to create the positive coming out process, because I can assure you, you tell me, if you didn't have that support network, do you believe you would have been able to handle everything in your family and manage that and navigate through that process on your own?
No, I would have spiraled out of control. I feel like I wouldn't even be here on this planet, because I would have taken myself out. And it's that conscious effort of when I've reached my rock bottom moment to say, I am going to do whatever it takes. And at that time in July 2015, I didn't know what that meant. I thought, I'm going to go to counseling and that's just going to solve my problem in 6 weeks. And it provided me with a step forward. And I needed every subsequent teacher, whether it was my counselor, and then I went to workshops, and then I came to you, and the journey still evolves to sort of get me to where I am today. And it's a deep commitment to say, I'm going to put myself first, and I need to go to work. And outside of those two things, nothing else matters until I feel that sense of happiness inside of me, until I feel that sense of belonging in my world, where I feel like life is worth living and things are happening for me, and I'm able to live out my dreams, and I can share my dreams, and I can have relationships with people, and I can share that. And I feel like that has evolved, and I'm at a point now where life is exciting. And a lot of the work that we did together in the last year, in terms of you seeing me as a whole person, as a person who has many facets, as a person who is going through things, and you met me where I was at, that was huge for me, because in my reality, outside of you, there weren't many people who were doing that. And through our work together, the fact that you're such a strong leader as an individual, and you do your own work, and you're always leveling up, and you're always sharing about the good things that are happening as well as the challenging moments. So it almost becomes, for me, it became a role model, right? To say, here's a practical example of someone who's Canadian born, who is part of an ethnic community, we share similar roots, you understand the complexity. So to see someone like that, there's almost, I can see myself in you. And then when I went through my journey, I said, well, if Ruby's having such a tough time on her off day, then if I have an off day, then it's okay. So it's almost that you mirror what you see. And it's what they say, representation is so important. We need representation of people. When people say the LGBT community, I'd love for people to think of all sorts of people, who
Mm-hmm.
identify as different sexual orientations from different communities of color, rather than the current notion of you're part of the LGBT community and the automatic association goes to Caucasians.
Right.
Because we don't see representation, and representation is so important, because if you don't see people like you in society, you will hide who you are. And that's why I do what I do, and I do it publicly, and I talk
Mm-hmm.
about difficult conversations and things that people don't want to talk about, and I open Pandora's box and I say, no, we need to talk about this.
Yeah, and that's so important. I mean,
Yeah.
like, first of all, I want to just reiterate for our listeners again, the positive coming out experience that really was available to you because you did whatever the fuck it took for
Yeah.
you to feel supported through that process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important to emphasize. Like, you didn't go
Yeah.
through it alone. Like,
No.
you literally did whatever the fuck it took
Yeah.
to feel supported through that process. And the other thing I want to talk about is this sense of belonging, uh, because you mentioned it multiple times here. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, this is one of our basic human needs.
Yeah.
In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of our basic human needs is a sense of belonging. So when a human being doesn't feel like they belong somewhere, that is going to create some sort of a rift in their life and anxiety and frustration.
Yeah.
And so for you, uh, you were lacking that sense of belonging, but now you've found it and you're owning it. But not only that, you are creating that space for others who haven't been represented.
Yeah.
You know, like just how you were describing me, and thank you so much for that. um, you are now the representation
Yeah.
for so many people out there. And it is so important for all our thought leaders listening to understand that, like, thought leadership comes with a divine responsibility, and that responsibility is that you are representing something or someone or a belief, and it is up to you to be that wholeheartedly.
And
And
it's not necessarily an easy process where I can say every day is a good day, because if I look at, I love the work that I do. It brings me great sense of fulfillment. It's a divine purpose. So when I do talk about it, it's not my words, they're words that are channeled through me. But at the
mm-hmm,
same time, there's a sense of real tenacity that is needed, because if I look at my religious community, we're probably one of the forward thinking groups. If you look
mm-hmm,
at the faith of Islam, just like Christianity, there's a bunch of groups in there. Some are more progressive, some are more conservative, and you have
mm-hmm,
everything in between. And you need tenacity, because in my community, in my religious community, we don't even talk about this.
mm-hmm,
We're very much like most religions and most communities of color in Canada, this is a Canadian problem.
mm-hmm.
This is an invention of the West. We do not have it. We are very much in denial. We are very much in a kindergarten level. So to be talking about this and to continue on this journey as a thought leader, to say, I am still going to talk about what my truth is,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how it's received. And even though it's seen as so taboo in my religious community, even though it's seen so taboo in the South Asian community, to still be there and to talk about it takes tenacity, and you almost need resilience to keep on going, because there are days where you feel fulfilled and you feel excited, and there are other days where I look around and I feel like, where are my people? Why do I feel like I'm the only one who's
Mm-hmm.
standing there? But at the same time, I know that the work that I'm doing is profound, because the number of people who reach out to me privately who say,
Mm-hmm.
because of your infographics, I had a positive coming out experience. I'm in
Yeah.
dire straits. I'm questioning my sexual orientation, and I don't know if my parents are going to love me. What do I do?
Yeah.
Um,
And that's powerful. And I
yeah.
love that you mentioned taboo, because, you know, really what you've chosen to be an expert in and a thought leader in is, quote unquote, a taboo topic.
Yeah.
And I know that there's probably people listening who feel as though their purpose is slightly taboo, or the conversations they want to have it
Mhm.
are slightly taboo. What's one piece of advice you can give to them?
speak from your heart and speak your truth with love and compassion, because if you speak it from that soul level, and if there's that connection with that higher power, what comes out will be so raw and so authentic and so honest, and it will move people and inspire people and help to provide an alternate view that is positive and empowering.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Hasina, we are at the end of the episode. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners?
So I would share part of a quote that the Prime Minister of Canada made, Justin Trudeau, and he mentioned all societies should be judged by the way they defend the rights of minority groups.
Wow.
And I would encourage people to simmer on that, and also simmer on another quote that he made where he said, if talking about gay rights makes you uncomfortable, that means you're not doing enough. So those powerful to what makes a successful community. And there's discomfort, then maybe courageous conversations need to be had.
Wow. Thank you so much, Hasina, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your story with our listeners, and really for having the courage to do what you're doing today. I mean, you're speaking to a crowd of 500, and I only see that being amplified so much in the near future. If anyone listening is seeking like a really strong advocate to speak at an event or anything of this nature, please do reach out to Hasina. She's incredible. Hasina, thank you so much
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Why don't you tell our listeners how they can stalk you online, and I'll be sure to put the links in the show notes.
The website is hasinajuma.com, and the handles on Facebook and Instagram are Hasina Juma 99.
Awesome. And the infographics are found on your website, correct?
Yes, under the resource tab, you'll find a whole bunch of them, and you can download them in PDF documents on your phone or on your computer for free.
Amazing. Well, this was an incredible episode to cap off this 10-episode series where I've been featuring my clients whom I absolutely adore and am inspired by. And I truly hope that everyone listening, that you see why they inspire me, and that you are inspired to go after your purpose and what it is that you're here to do on this planet. So thank you, listeners. Thank you for joining us on this special client feature series on Today's Thought Leader, where I'm challenging you to rise up, speak up, and create a movement. If you are interested in working with me, just head to my website and click the Work With Me tab to see all the options on how we can create something together. And if you're interested in seeing me live in Los Angeles and meeting Hasina in person, come over to Amplified Soul Live, which is my 3-day event. It takes place in February. And the link for that is rubyfremont.com/ASL. If you have any questions or want to get in touch with myself or Hasina, please reach out to us on social media. Again, the handles are in the show notes. This episode was sponsored by the Mayfair Hotel and Eve American Bistro, home of Amplified Soul Live 2019. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you all next week for a brand new episode of Today's Thought Leader.